Hi there and welcome to a rainy day here in the food forest. So I've been planting food forest for a few years now in 3 totally different climates, and during that time I've made a lot of mistakes and learned quite a few lessons. And in the beginning, when you hear food forest, it sounds kind of magical, right? You plant some trees and a few years later you're picking apples while the birds sing overhead. And yes, sometimes it is like that, but a lot of the time it's not nearly as romantic as it sounds. Often, especially in the beginning, you end up like over planning and making it much more complicated than it needs to be. So in this video I want to share the things that have gone wrong over the years for me, a few things that have actually worked out, and the simple approach that made everything much easier. And if you're thinking about starting a food forest, or you're just somewhere like in the middle of figuring it out, hopefully this helps you avoid a few of the mistakes that I ran into. So let's get into it. I remember well the first attempt that I had at starting a food forest in France some 10 years ago. I had like notebooks full of sketches and plans for like every corner of the land, where the pond would go, where the windbreak would go, like the pathways. And I must have redrawn that map probably like 20 times. But after a while of doing that, I came to realize that I wasn't really planning at all. It was more like hiding. Sure, I told myself that I was being strategic, but really I was afraid to get it wrong. And I thought that if I could just plan hard enough, I would somehow skip the mistakes. Now, don't get me wrong, like some planning definitely matters. You need to have like a basic understanding of where the wind comes from, the sun angles, the water, and some of the basics. But the problem is that it's easy to take this a little bit too far. Like we get stuck in the comfort of research mode, where we're constantly drawing up plans, making more spreadsheets, and just watching like one more YouTube video in case we miss that little tip that is going to change everything. And in that process, we forget that a forest is built by planting, not planning. And my turning point was when I stopped thinking in terms of like giant plans and just focused on one small area, one little experiment at a time. That's what eventually became what I now call the One Guild Food Forest, which I've written an entire ebook about that you can download below. But basically it's simple. Instead of trying to like design the whole property at once, I just started with one small area, one main tree, like the anchor of the guild, surrounded by a few shrubs, herbs and support plants. Something that I could actually plant on a weekend and take care of. It's simple, but it works. You get to start right away without risking much or overcomplicating things. Then, as you watch it grow, you start learning like what works and what doesn't, how the soil reacts, what survives the wind, what needs more shade. And once you've seen that first little system working, you just do it again, like somewhere else on the property. Same process, but better each time. And that's how a food forest really starts, like one small living example at a time. And that was for me personally the light bulb moment, because if you've ever gone down like the permaculture rabbit hole, you know what I mean. Before you even plant a single tree, you're already like buried in maps and diagrams, from contour lines to sector maps, wind patterns, rainfall charts from like 3 years ago. And sure, like all that stuff has its place. It helps you understand your land a bit better. But if you're not careful, it can also bury you before you even begin. I've seen so many people, like myself included, get stuck there. Endless planning, endless analysis, and not a single tree in the ground. At some point, you just have to stop measuring the rain and just start planting in it. I realized that I didn't need like a 20-page design, and I just needed to start a single living example. That small guild, that first little pocket of food forest, taught me much more than a plan ever did. And eventually when you start planting, you see things for what they really are. You notice how some plants will grow really fast while others just sit there. You see which ones get like eaten, which ones bounce back, and which ones you'll never plant again. You figure out like how far apart things really need to be, and even the basics like digging holes, mulching and watering. You start to understand what works and what just wastes time. And it's all trial and error, but that's the point. Those first mistakes, honestly, they're like the best thing that can happen to you. In the beginning, everything feels like an uphill battle and the learning curve is quite steep. Every new step, you're basically figuring it out as you go, but little by little it starts to make sense. You learn what actually matters, and before you know it, you start to feel like more confident in your own abilities. And once you've figured it out on a small patch of land, scaling it up becomes suddenly not so intimidating anymore. As time goes on, once you've planted your first guild, you will know exactly like what to do when it's time to scale up. And that leads me right into the next lesson. Once I finally stopped planning and started planting, I went way too far into like the other direction. It's been like I've been holding back for so long that when I finally began, I tried to do like everything at once. I told myself, if I just plant enough trees, I will never have to buy food again. It was that like perfect life fantasy, the one where you wake up outside, surrounded by abundance, picking fruit for breakfast, cooking from your land, never needing the supermarket again. But I realized when you try to reach that vision too fast, you can turn your dream into like another full-time job. I was watering non-stop, fighting weeds, hauling in mulch, pruning, all before the system was even established. And instead of feeling free, I felt like tied to it, like the land owned me. The truth is, self-sufficiency takes time, and honestly, at this point in my journey, I've come to realize that it's okay if I never even get there all the way. I'd much rather be like part of a local community where everyone has their skills, where everyone has their own passions, and we share collectively in our abundance. But of course, like it would be great to have at least some or most of our food producing systems installed. And while doing this, I've learned that the goal isn't perfection, but it's more like progress. Everything takes time, and trying to juggle like building out your systems while balancing life can be a real recipe for overwhelm. So to counter that, I now always start small and set up one system at a time. I build layers that take work off my plate instead of adding more to it, because if you rush it, you will burn out long before your trees ever mature. And to be honest, once I slowed down and treated it like a lifelong project, rather than a checklist that had to be done like this week, this month, or this year, everything changed. I stopped chasing complete independence and started focusing on building stability instead, where I'm creating a landscape that feeds my family year round, needs less maintenance over time, and is actually super enjoyable to live in. And that's when I started to love it again. Even if I never become fully self-sufficient, I'm building something that is productive, it is beautiful, and it is deeply satisfying. Essentially, it becomes a system that gives back more each year while giving me my time and peace of mind back too, which is a great bonus. At the end of the day, we start the food forest and all these projects to increase the quality of our life, not to chain ourselves to another endless list of chores. And that's the part that's easy to forget when you're out there working in the trenches. We start all this because we want more freedom, we want more connection and a better way of living, not just another full-time job that happens to be outdoors. So if the system can feed us, bring some beauty and still give us time to breathe, that's success to me. But success doesn't come from copying designs and strategies from other climates, which leads me to the next lesson in my journey. I remember watching all these beautiful permaculture projects online with lush tropical gardens and food forests that looked effortless. So in the beginning, like I tried to copy them. I planted the same species I saw in those videos. I used the same spacing, the same guild layouts. The problem was I wasn't living in the same context or climate or in their world. Like what thrived for them barely survived for me. The soil behaved differently, like the wind came from different directions, the seasons didn't even match, and very quickly you will learn that you can't import someone else's food forest in detail. Sure, you can copy and use the principles and fundamental lessons, but you have to learn what will work for you on your land and in your climate. And when I first started in France, we were working in a temperate climate with like 4 distinguished seasons. Everything looked good on paper, so like most beginners, I copied what I saw online with like dense plantings, layered guilds, lots of variety, like close together. And it looked lush for a while, but the problem was there was not enough sunlight. Winters were long, light was weak, and everything was packed in tight. Like the trees and the shrubs, they didn't get enough sunlight. So growth slowed down, fruiting was minimal, and I learned the hard way that in cooler climates, spacing is everything. If you want production, you need more light and room than you think. Then after that, we left for Portugal, and there it was the complete opposite. Now we suddenly had too much sunlight and very long summers with high temperatures. I went all in on like Mediterranean species, thinking that I finally figured it out, except I forgot the basics. Without shade or ground cover, the soil baked and every exposed patch turned into terracotta. The mulch turned to dust and many young trees cooked from the roots up. And that's when I learned that in harsh, dry climates, you don't start with the fruit trees. You start with the tough pioneer plants that can take the beating and build the shelter for everything else to follow. And only once that is in place, you can then start adding the more sensitive fruit trees. And now we are in the Azores, and once again, it's the total opposite. Here the challenge isn't heat, but it's the fact that the growing season kind of never ends. That in combination with constant wind, heavy rains, high humidity and soil that erodes if you just so much as look at it in the wrong way, there's a whole different set of challenges. Even like if you don't have a windbreak here, your tender fruit trees won't last long or will heavily underperform. And if you don't manage the slopes properly, the rains can literally like carve rivers through your land overnight. And that's a really important lesson to learn. Like every place is different, and what works beautifully in one area can completely fail in another. So there's not a copy and paste recipe when it comes to starting a food forest. Each climate has its own mix of like sun, wind, water and soil, like its own personality really, and you've got to work within those confines. And that's the real trap of trying to copy designs online. You're copying result but not the processes. You're imitating an ecosystem that evolved somewhere else, and when you do that, your forest basically fights you every step of the way. So instead of copying designs, what really matters is understanding the principles behind them, because those don't change. Nature always works in patterns, with layers, with diversity and with cooperation. Like every healthy ecosystem has tall trees, smaller trees, shrubs, herbs and ground covers, like all doing different jobs. Some bring in the nutrients, some protect the soil, some feed the insects and some feed us. Those roles stay the same no matter where you live. What changes is how you apply them on your land. The spacing, the species, the layout, and how you adapt it to the sun, wind and soil in your context. And honestly, the best place to start isn't by reinventing the wheel. Just look at what is already growing well where you are, with the plants that thrive without much care. Copy that first. Build your foundation with the species that already fit your climate, and once that system is stable, then you can start to experiment with more exotic stuff, if that is of course something that you want to. Because if the base of your food forest is strong, you can afford to take those risks. But if you start with the risky stuff first, you will spend most of your time trying to keep it alive. Once I learned that, like everything changed, because I stopped losing trees and the land started giving back. And that's when I finally understood like food forests really do work like anywhere. Well, maybe not in Antarctica, but pretty much like everywhere else, as long as you stick to the fundamentals. And if you're just getting started, like don't overcomplicate it. Start with the one guild food forest and install a couple of guilds. Keep it simple, keep it manageable, plan them, learn from it, and then expand as you go. Which brings me to the next lesson. Now, this one is a bit of a tricky one that most people fall over as well, especially like in the beginning. Once you've overcome all of like the previous mistakes, you're super excited and motivated to get started. And I can remember it well. And I made this mistake both in France and later on in Portugal as well, to a lesser extent, luckily. But I went overboard and planted like way too many trees. But it wasn't the number of trees, it was the kind of trees that I've planted. Almost every single one was a fruit tree, because in my head that's what a food forest was, like a forest full of food, right? So I planted apples, pears, figs, plums, and I just kept on planting. And for a while it felt like progress. Everything was green, the rows were filling in, and I imagined like all the harvest that I would be getting in just a few years. Except I didn't realize I was building a hungry system. All those trees were consumers, not contributors. I'd basically planted an orchard, pretending to be a forest. And there were like no nitrogen fixes, no biomass plants, no chop and drop plants, sacrificial and support trees to create like microclimates, no ground covers to protect the soil, or flowers and herbs to bring in the pollinators and repel pests. And so I ended up doing nature's job for her. I had to haul in compost for nutrients. I had to water non-stop to keep it hydrated and constantly like fighting back weeds. It was exhausting to say the least. And the funny thing is I called it self-sufficiency, but in reality it was more like self-sabotage with a couple of extra steps. That's when I finally started learning about the support species, which are the plants that don't feed you, but they feed the system. Think of plants like black locust, acacias and clovers that can fix nitrogen, or plants like comfrey, pigeon pea and Mexican sunflower that grow fast and create mulch. These are tough pioneer plants that you can prune back over and over again, which are turning sunlight into soil faster than nature normally would. And this does two things. You're cycling nutrients very rapidly through the system that your fruit trees can benefit from, and you're creating a never-ending supply of mulch. Basically, it becomes your built-in compost machine. And once I started doing that, it finally clicked. A food forest isn't built by planting fruit trees, but it's built by planting relationships. Because if you look at a natural forest, nothing grows alone. Every layer does something. The tall trees, they shape the wind and pull minerals from deep below. Shrubs fill the middle space and they can feed birds and pollinators. Vines climb them, bind everything together. Ground covers, they can protect the soil. And even the weeds and herbs, or the so-called mess, they are doing invisible work all the time. And that's what I was missing in the beginning. I hadn't built a system that could feed itself at all, but instead it depended on me to keep it alive. It maybe started to look a little bit like a forest, but it sure didn't work like one. It was just still like a collection of trees and not a living ecosystem. And as you can see here, now I've done it completely different, because right now when I plant, I don't just ask okay, what do I want to harvest? I ask, okay, what does a specific plant do for the system? Maybe I need something to shade the soil. Maybe I need something to attract bees or to keep pests off the fruit trees. If it doesn't earn its keep in some way, shape or form, it doesn't make the cut, because essentially the food forest isn't just about the fruit. Sure, it's one of the reasons that we plant it and one of the primary outcomes, but it's more about the function. And we can design it in such a way that eventually, I can just step away and only come a couple of times per year to do some light maintenance and mostly harvesting, which is awesome. And I go over this in more depth in the One Guild Food Forest ebook, which you can download below. But once all the layers start working together, from the taller trees down to the ground covers, the system begins to run itself. The diversity balances the pest, the mulch grows right where you need it, the soil stays protected and alive, and that's when you start to realize that you're not managing plants anymore, but you're kind of managing relationships. And once those relationships click, that's when it starts feeling like a real food forest. And of course, you can design this system in a million different ways to suit your taste. You can create a very jungle-ish looking chaotic food forest, or you can have a much more maintained and botanical garden-like food forest. The choice is really up to you, as long as you keep the relationships in mind and you make sure to plant in teams of plants that are all working together. Then the rest will fall into place, which brings me to probably one of the most important and most profound lessons that I've learned over the last 10 years. After all those years and after all those lessons, I started to see a pattern. Every mistake that I made came from trying to control nature, trying to push her faster, neater, more productive, more perfect. And over the years, after all the hours, the sweat, the small victories and the big losses, I finally understood something simple. Nature doesn't actually need me that much. We're not like the managers of the land. We are the partners if we choose to. Our job isn't to force the forest into being. All we can do is set it into motion and then give it the space to express its full potential. We can set in motion a beautiful system that feeds us while taking care of the soil, the wildlife and everything else that depends on it. And it took me years to understand this one. When I first started planting food forests, I thought my job was to manage everything. I was the planner, I was the problem solver, the caretaker, and the one that I was thinking keeping it all together. If something went wrong, I came in there and fixed it. If a plant wasn't growing, I fed it. If weeds showed up, I cleaned them. And it felt good, like I was doing something meaningful or something useful. But somewhere along the way, I realized that I was solving problem nature didn't actually have, because the forest doesn't fight for balance, it just becomes balance. It doesn't clean up its mess, it uses it. It doesn't ask for help, it just adapts. And I started to notice that every time that I tried to intervene too much, I would actually slow things down. I would cut plants that were protecting the soil. I would pull weeds that were improving the system. I would tidy up areas that were doing their own repair. So over the years I started to step back little by little, and that's when the real magic began, because the trees started feeding the soil without me. The ground covers started outcompeting the weeds that I used to fight. Birds and insects started to move in, and the pest problems that I used to panic about, they just stopped happening. The more I let go, the more the system found its own way. It's quite humbling realizing that the food forest doesn't actually need you to run it. It just needs you to start it. And somewhere in that slowing down, something else shifted for me. I began to see that I wasn't building a system. I was simply being part of one. A temporary participant in a much larger web that's been here long before me and will continue long after I'm gone, I hope. Every action, every seed that I plant, every drop of water that falls, every bird that lands here, it's all part of one long ongoing conversation. We share the same energy, the same space, the same moment in time. And once you really feel that, you stop trying to control it, because you realize that you are it. You're just one more living thing doing your small part in something much bigger. Now, when I walk through the food forest, I don't see my work anymore. I see nature's work, and I just happened to be part of the opening act. Every mistake taught me something that I couldn't have learned from a book. The overplanning showed me where fear hides. The burnout taught me patience. The climate lessons taught me humility. And the soil, the plants, the wildlife, they all taught me to listen before I act. In a way, the food forest has been teaching me how to grow, and not the other way around. And that's the part no one really tells you. So if you're just getting started, don't be afraid to make mistakes. They're not failures, they're just feedback. Every dead tree, every pest, every misstep, they're all part of the education that nature gives you for free, if you're willing to listen. And if I have to do it all over again, I wouldn't change a thing, because without the wrong turns, I would never have found the right balance. The truth is, you just keep showing up season after season, doing your part and letting nature handle the rest. And one day you look back and you look around you and realize it's not just a forest full of food, it's a record of everything that you've learned, of every success, of every failure, every moment you choose to keep going. And that's the real harvest. And maybe I'm getting a little bit too sentimental here, but hopefully we can keep this going, keep this work alive, so the next generation can build on what we've started. Use our lessons and take it even further, because life's short and we might as well spend it growing something that lasts. But, alright, so now we're drifting into real kumbaya territory, so I'll stop here. But I hope this video has brought you something useful for your own journey as a forest gardener. And if you want to start a beautiful, low maintenance food forest that actually provides year-round food and stability, the best place to begin and really learn the ropes is just start with a single guild. If you'd like to see exactly how I start a food forest with just one guild, check out some of the resources on our website at theforestgardener.com and watch this video next to see how I start a guild from scratch. Thank you very much for watching, everyone. I hope it was useful, and see you in the next video. Bye.